Hello friends, more than 1 million flights travel from one place to another every day across the globe. In India alone, 70 to 80,000 flights operate daily. Analysis shows that airways are the safest transportation system in the world. Other systems like buses, trains, or ships are considered medium level, where the fatality rate in accidents is much higher. Imagine you are going somewhere for work and your car runs out of fuel in the middle of the road. This has probably happened to you, right? You might think of it as a huge problem, but just imagine an airplane is flying at 41,000 feet and suddenly it runs out of fuel. Your car problem is nothing compared to that, right? This is exactly what happened in 1983 on Air Canada Flight 143. A day before this incident, the flight had traveled from Toronto to Edmonton, where it underwent regular maintenance. On the morning of June 23, 1983, the plane arrived in Montreal from Edmonton. After reaching Montreal, the crew members exchanged duties. This brought in a new pilot, Captain Robert Pearson, who had 15,000 hours of flying experience. In the aviation industry, experience is recorded in hours. Back then, 15,000 hours was quite significant for any pilot. He was joined by First Officer Maurice Quintal, who had only 7,000 hours of experience. Friends, you should know that at that time, Canada was upgrading its old measurement system to the new Imperial metric system. The Imperial unit system, which is now common worldwide, was only in the processing stage then. This upgrade process became the biggest reason for the accident. This is what happened in Canada's aviation industry. The new Imperial system was installed on the 767 planes, but the older measurement system was still present in others. The refueling team forgot to load 223,000 kilograms of fuel into Flight 143. Since Flight Air Canada 143 and the 767 were identical but brand new, the refueling team assumed it still used the old Imperial system. Consequently, instead of 223,000 kilograms, they loaded only 223,000 pounds of fuel, which was less than half of what was required. The flight crew also made a mistake. They gave confirmation to the refueling team without checking the fuel levels before takeoff. Then, they took off. Later, at an altitude of over 41,000 feet, the captain saw a signal. It meant the left engine had stopped working. They were heading to Edmonton after refueling at Montreal, but when the engine failed, they were midway. The nearest spot was a small airport. The captain thought they could land there, but shortly after the left engine failed, the right engine stopped as well. When the pilots realized this, they were 41,000 feet above the ground. The electricity in a plane is generated by the rotation of the turbines. But now, both turbines were only spinning due to the moving air, which wasn't enough to supply electricity to the entire plane. As a result, there was very little electricity in the cockpit, making it impossible to power the full monitoring system. Consequently, many monitoring systems shut down. Captain Pearson and the first officer began deciding what to do, as the lives of the crew and 60 passengers were in their hands. They had no fuel and both engines were dead. Due to the lack of sufficient light, many instruments stopped working. Only some analog instruments were functional. They first opened the Boeing 767 emergency guide manual to see what to do if both engines fail. After searching extensively, they found that the manual had no information on this. Such an incident had never happened before, and the team that created the manual never imagined such a condition would arise. Therefore, there was nothing to learn from the manual, and seemingly no way to survive. Captain Pearson decided to attempt a super serious landing. But the problem was that without electricity, the vertical indicator and altitude indicators weren't working. There was no way to know exactly how high they were or how fast the plane was descending. Using his full experience, the captain began descending the plane. He was descending at a speed of 400 kilometers per hour. The first officer was calculating whether they could land safely without power. After calculating the distance using mechanical instruments and help from air traffic control, they realized the plane was hurtling toward the ground at high speed and would hit the earth very soon. Under these conditions, the plane could reach the Gimli emergency spot. Suddenly, the first officer remembered his old Air Force base, Gimli, which was located nearby. Captain Pearson and the air traffic team calculated that they could reach it. However, they didn't know that the base had been converted into a racetrack. Landing an emergency flight on a racetrack wouldn't have been an issue if it were empty, but a race was currently ongoing. and the stadium was full of spectators. There was a drag track nearby that was empty but very dangerous. The captain decided to land there regardless. The landing gear came out due to a gravity drop. The vertical speed was too high for any normal landing, but there was no other choice. Furthermore, something had already happened that would make the landing even more dangerous. Since the engines were off, the plane was silent, and the lack of lights made it hard to see. Because of this, the spectators below couldn't realize the terrifying danger approaching them. Secondly, the front wheel, known as the nose wheel, failed to lock properly due to the gravity drop. When he heard this, the turbines were spinning due to the air from the vertical speed, generating some electricity for the hydraulic steering. But as they got lower, the blades spun slower, and the hydraulic steering lost power. Controlling the plane became extremely difficult. Despite all this, two good things happened that saved many lives. First, the nose wheel wasn't working properly. When the plane touched the ground, Captain Pearson applied full force and brakes, causing the nose wheel to collapse inward. The nose of the plane hit the ground, and after a big bounce, it began skidding against the earth. This friction significantly reduced the plane's speed. This was actually a blessing. If the front wheel had been locked, the plane wouldn't have been able to reduce such high speed in such a short distance. It would have crashed into the spectators at high speed, causing thousands of deaths. Additionally, the captain applied only the right brake on the rear wheels to intentionally brake the main landing gear, causing another part of the plane to touch the ground. This created even more friction, and the plane stopped very quickly. Just 17 minutes after the fuel ran out and both engines died, the plane successfully landed on the ground. No one was seriously injured in this accident. Captain Pearson was demoted for 6 months, and the first officer was suspended for 2 weeks because it was their fault. They had cleared the flight without checking the fuel levels. However, for their incredible feat of landing the plane safely under such conditions, both were awarded the Outstanding Airmanship Award, and their pilot careers continued. The 767 plane was also put back into service by Air Canada after some maintenance and continued to fly for many years. It was finally retired 25 years later in 2008. None of the passengers on that flight will ever forget those 17 minutes. If you liked the video, feel free to share it. If you enjoy watching such mysterious, uncommon, and interesting videos, subscribe to the Darkillusionist channel right now and press the bell icon. See you in the next episode. Until then, stay well. Thank you.